The first thing I did was I said, okay, what asset class do I want? Why do I want it? And what risk profile and return profile am I looking for? In real estate, you always want to be mindful of hedging that downside risk while maintaining the upside reward.
How did you get involved in boutique hotels? How were you introduced to it? And what were the things that appealed to you?
So I actually kind of stumbled into it. So my wife and I were both from San Antonio, Texas. We wanted a place to crash when we were in town for the holidays. So we thought, let's go ahead and buy a short-term rental so that we can control the schedule and just dip in and out. And so from there, set my sights on a boutique hotel where we can fit even more units under one roof.
The Solvay purchase is your first boutique hotel.
It is, yeah.
What are some of the pitfalls and things you learned that somebody else could hear now and avoid?
Oh, that is such a good question.
In life, there's a blueprint for everything. There's no need to start over. Hear from industry leaders, those at the top of their fitness journey, and real estate gurus. They tell you exactly how they did it. All you have to do is listen, learn, and execute. This is The Blueprint with Brad Rice.
All right. Welcome back to another edition of The Blueprint. Today we've got somebody joining us from Texas, made the trek out here, not just for me, we'll get into why, but and we want to welcome Gideon Spencer, who's heavily involved in real estate. Let me tell you a little bit about him because you guys are going to get a lot out of this, especially if you are into short-term rentals and you see some changes going on in your market. This is going to be super valuable for you. So Gideon, he's a real estate investor. He specializes now in boutique hotels and creative financing strategies, including seller financing, subject to. He, of course, does traditional loans and bridge financing as well, but we want to talk a bit about that and how to set yourself up for success there. But he also recently acquired a 24-unit boutique hotel just north of us here where we're located in Solvang. And so I want to learn a bit about that because that's an exciting thing. He's got a background, however, that's a little unusual. It's in technology. And he was a founder in with a tech startup, and he had some success there. So I definitely want to learn about that. Anyway, Gideon really believes that his success is attributed to successful teams aligning their incentives and building their business to thrive as a unit with a clear vision. Really big on that. He also has a successful podcast, and it's called The Hunt for Incredible, which maybe I'll be on soon. But welcome to the show, Gideon.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Brad.
Yeah.
Super stoked to be here.
Yeah, right on. Super excited to have welcomed you here, and also sitting in the studio with us is your wife, which is a pleasant surprise. So, like I said, hopefully she doesn't make you too nervous. You look a little... Nah, just kidding.
I was nervous around her.
Always. Good. All right. Well, cool. Hey, I want to kind of dive right into this because although I want to learn about the tech startups and stuff, I think our audience is really into real estate in various capacities, in mortgage, in real estate investing, in flipping, and a lot of them are in short-term rentals. And I've had a few guys on here that really specialize that. Like, it's all about Airbnb, short-term rentals. And I was first introduced to boutique hotels through Rich Summers, who we're both part of a group of his. But I had heard him on a podcast. He was actually on the Brad Lee podcast. And he was talking about boutique hotels, and he mentioned a hotel that he acquired that I actually knew. It was up north here and on Black Sands Beach, and I had been in that area, and I always thought, man, they were pretty run down. I go, this could be a really great area. It has its own airstrip. And so it resonated with me. And I wound up reaching out to Rich and learning more about that strategy, which I like to call short-term rental on steroids. Because it is short-term rentals. Like, people are coming in, they're staying a few nights, they're leaving. But you've got a group of them that you manage all at once instead of separate properties. So how did you get involved in boutique hotels? How were you introduced to it? And what were the things that appealed to you?
Yeah, so I actually kind of stumbled into it. So my wife and I were both from San Antonio, Texas, but we don't live there anymore. So we wanted a place to crash when we were in town for the holidays. So we thought, let's go ahead and buy a short-term rental so that we can control the schedule and just dip in and out while at the same time building wealth, etc. So a similar play to a lot of people. And then with the tech background, in tech, your biggest returns come from the economies of scale, the fact that you can build one thing and then distribute it at a very low cost. So with those things in mind, I wanted to compress as many units into a single roof as possible. So with residential, the biggest you can go effectively is a fourplex. So I was looking for a fourplex where we could convert all of the units into short-term rentals just to really juice up the cash flow. I also got to compress as much learning into that experience as possible, which is another pillar of mine, which is I cared far less about the return profile and far more into how many lessons can we pack into this property. So we moved into the first unit. I did a lot of the work myself just to get familiar with what that experience would be like so I could subcontract out the rest of the work without getting ripped off. The second unit did some subcontracting out, and then the following 2 units hired a GC to knock it out quickly. So back to compressing as much learning as possible. And then from there, looked at the numbers and saw this model makes a lot of sense. It's has really tight feedback loops similar to tech, which I enjoyed. So you can make a change and the next night hear about it from a guest or make these improvements and adjustments. And the feedback loop is really quick. It's much faster than long-term rentals where, you know, you have people who have contracts with the asset to live there for a year at a time. And so you're making changes and you're hearing back things slowly. And so I liked how quick it was. And from there, I thought, man, what would it look like to scale this thing up? I like the model. I like the economies of scale, so I want to go bigger. And so from there, set my sights on a boutique hotel where we can fit even more units under one roof, which is what led to the Solvang purchase.
So the Solvang purchase is your first boutique hotel.
It is, yeah.
I want to take a half a step back and talk about this fourplex because it is a strategy that I preach, especially for first-time home buyers. So let's go back and kind of define this. Residential property is 1 to 4 family. So it's a single unit, duplex, triplex, or quad. Okay. When you get beyond that into multifamily, it's called commercial. And there are some advantages to commercial loans, but let's put that aside for just a moment. When you're buying residential property, you get residential financing, which is really appealing, especially if you're a first-time home buyer. And if you buy a fourplex, owner occupied, and take one of the units, the other 3 rentals contribute to your income to qualify for that purchase. So a single family, let's just say, you know, let's use an area that's more reasonable than Southern California, but let's just say a fourplex in X area is going to cost you $800,000 to purchase, where a single family might be $250,000 or $300,000. Well, you might think, well, how am I going to qualify for an $800,000 purchase? Well, the way you qualify for it is you can take the rent or market rent if it's not occupied and use a good percentage of that, typically 75%, to help you to qualify for the best financing possible, which is long-term financing, 30 years, whether it's a fixed rate or a hybrid product, just depending on the market we're in. We're in higher interest rates now. It's still very appealing. And now you leverage that, it becomes a business, and eventually you move out of that, you move somebody into your unit, and that is your play to long-term wealth. It's the first property in your portfolio, and it's 4 doors. Is that what you did? Do you still have that property?
Yeah, that is what we did. That is what we did. Unfortunately, not too long after we acquired it, Fannie Mae came out with that 5% down, which I highly recommend anybody who's trying to max out their leverage do, because then you can do the Fannie Mae 5% down, you acquire the asset, and then you can still get a cost segregation study done to claim bonus depreciation and pull a lot of that capital back out. So the barrier of entry is a lot lower than most people think.
It definitely is. And yeah, the tax aspect to it is separate from the investment aspect as far as loan qualifying is concerned. A lot of people don't know this. You can do it with an FHA loan and do 3.5% down. You can do it with a VA loan if you served the country, and for those that did, thank you for your service. But you can do that with 0 down, and there's no loan limit. So, you know, there are some ways to really leverage. If you are out there and you are thinking about buying your first place, but you love real estate, you want to get into that asset class, you really got to think about finding a 3 or 4plex and making that your first property.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. Yeah, that was our primary residence too. We moved in. So we were basically living rent free while getting to fix it up and be close on site as the subcontractors and GCs were out there fixing it up. So it was a cool experience. I don't know if we would do it again now that we've graduated past that phase of life, but
Yeah, but
yeah.
you can't trade that experience in for
Oh,
anything.
not a chance.
So
Not a
yeah, there are
chance.
people, by the way, that do that. They'll do the first one, and then they'll do another one, and then they'll do another one, and that's great. When you're single, you don't have a family, you don't have kids, and you can kind of move around like that. Shoot, acquire 12,
Yep.
16 units in that same fashion. That's a huge lift, and you can do that, guys, in a very short period of time. So yeah, this is great stuff. I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
So let's talk very specific because this is called the blueprint, and what I like to do is make sure that people that are listening to this or watching it, hopefully go to YouTube and watch it. There's nothing better than watching versus listening, but is really break this down. So here you are, young Gideon, right? How old when you were buying this property?
This property, 30.
Okay, you're 30. You're buying your first property. It's a fourplex. So go through the entire exercise, literally step by step with us. The looking, did you use an agent? Did you do it yourself? The finding it, what you were looking for, all the way through to the financing piece of it and closing escrow.
Yeah, so the first thing I did was began ripping through books. I didn't know anything about real estate or investing. My parents invested in real estate growing up, so I was like roughly familiar with how it was a good investment and what the asset class kind of looked like. But the challenge with real estate is there are so many options that sometimes it can be challenging for people. Like they'll step into a space and get shiny object syndrome and say, oh, self-storage, like that's a great asset class. And then they'll see, the STR model and they'll say, oh, that's nice too because it cash flows really well. And then they'll see multifamily and say, oh, but that's really stable. So they're all over the place. So the first thing I did was I said, okay, what asset class do I want? Why do I want it? And what risk profile and return profile am I looking for? So step number one, like I said, I was more diving into it as, a place to stay when we were in town for the holidays. And also it was a great place to park some capital. So with that, it made sense for the short-term rental model. In terms of the return profile that we were looking for when we were not staying there, and the risk associated with that, we looked in areas that had consistent growth over prolonged periods of time and had very low risk. Especially with it being a short-term rental, we wanted to make sure that it was in a market that could compete really well on location. And then also I raised some capital from family because this property needed quite a bit of work. It was 100 years old, but it was in a killer part of town. So we raised some capital from my brother, and I wanted to make sure that obviously his capital was taken care of. So I picked a location that checked off 3 boxes so that we would have a plan A, B, and C. Plan A was as a short-term rental, so it would cash flow really hard. Plan B was as a midterm rental, so we picked a location that was within a couple miles of This one was within a couple miles of 3 hospitals, 2 universities, and it was near one of the largest military bases in Texas. So the midterm rental play is also very strong. It's so strong that we were even debating, do we just go full on midterm rental?
Can you define midterm rental for us?
Yeah, midterm rental is a booking that's anywhere from 1 to 9 months typically.
And your target, you say universities and hospitals, what's the reason for that?
Yeah, so the reason for that is that tends to be, so different demographics, they come with different trade-offs. Nurses and military are really great in general because they take care of the property. They tend to be very responsible, and they typically book for anywhere from 3 to 6 months at a time, which is fantastic because you can get pretty similar cash flow to a short-term rental, depending on the market, to a short-term rental for similar work as a long-term rental, which is really great. You just have to furnish the place, but the return on the capital invested to furnish the place is crazy quick because, you're basically charging short-term rental rates just to furnish a place, even though you're not talking to the guests very frequently at all.
Yeah, and to drill down into that, with midterm rentals, because I do have some familiarity with this, and you could do this near even, like sports training facilities and so forth. These are typically corporations that are signing and paying for people to come in, do some training or do some periodic work where they do need to stay for a few months, and it's much better living situation for them than staying in a hotel. And so, yeah, I mean, it's a great strategy. But again, that was kind of the second pillar for you. And the third pillar was, hey, all else fails, I want it to be able to long-term rent it as well.
Correct. Yeah. And so the long-term rental play in this market looked really good also. So when I was underwriting the numbers, I needed this asset to work with long-term numbers so that I could say, like, worst case scenario, if we can't get permitting for short-term rentals, if whatever happens in the market and this was right after COVID. So we were like, literally anything can happen.
Yeah.
And then, the plan C was long-term rental. And the long-term rental, we would make some money, but not very much. But I didn't care. I was like, as long as we don't lose the asset, right? Because that's plan C. So back to compressing as much learning into this asset as possible. We played a lot with the short-term and the midterm renting. We didn't play with the long-term renting because we didn't want to make that long of a commitment. But we did play with both, and we found that the best cash flow comes from short-term rentals in the summer months, and then in the slower months pivoting to midterm rentals. And that actually really juices up our returns year-round. So it turns out to be a fairly stable market. And then in the summer months, we just get that extra cash flow from the short-term rentals.
Very interesting. Okay, so this is your first property. You figured out how to come up with the down payment and the rehabilitation cost. You had your brother help you with that. When you're getting the loan, was that just in your wife's name?
It was.
Okay, so your brother came in afterward with the funding for doing the rehab?
No, he came in up front.
So for the loan itself, was that called a gift money?
It was, yeah.
Okay. So again, guys, for those that don't know loans, you can't really get a loan for a down payment to get a loan for a property.
Right.
So you got to categorize it as gift funds. He gifts it. You guys say, okay, we're going to partner on these things, and you do that on the side. And so he became your partner on this, and you had never been a landlord before, right?
Right.
So let's talk about that step, because I think that's a big inhibitor for a lot of people, is the unknown. Did you do it using the Airbnb platform? How did you learn about it? What are some of the pitfalls and things you learned that somebody else could hear now and avoid?
I'd say if you're considering joining the AmeriFund team, it's a really good idea.
We as processors at AmeriFund Home Loans support the loan officers in every aspect of the loan once it comes into processing, because we want them out there marketing themselves and originating more loans and supporting more borrowers.
Competitive commission plans are a given, and powerful technology is expected, but what truly sets us apart is our culture. We've built a solid support system for our loan officers.
If you're interested in joining the AmeriFund team, go to amerifund.com/careers.
Yeah, so the pitfalls were something that I capitalized on with the hotel. So the pitfalls that I found was I was ripping through books. I read 12 books within the first 3 months of deciding to dive into the space. I was listening to podcasts. I was going on morning runs and just like obsessing over this. And I learned a lot, and I'm glad that I did. What I would have done differently is I would have partnered with somebody who had done it before in the space. You can't really, I always say it in this way, you have intellectual knowledge and then you have experiential knowledge. And the experiential knowledge is really where you can fine tune and move quickly and cut out the bullshit. And so what I did was I ingested a ton of information and created this intellectual knowledge, but I didn't know anybody who was in the short-term rental space. I didn't know, and same with the boutique hotel, so we can even chat about that too, because I literally knew 0 people who were in short-term rentals. My parents had been in real estate previously, but their lives ended up taking different directions, so they weren't up to date on how things were rolling with it. And so that was probably what I would say was my biggest pitfall, is we ended up making decisions that delayed the renovation, and so that impacted our numbers. Fortunately, we were cash flowing well enough on the units that were up and running that we were totally fine, because again, we baked in so many backup plans, because for me it was my brother was trusting me with his capital, and I was putting a lot of my own capital in as well. So I wanted to make sure that we had so many backup plans that this thing could not fail. Yeah. And so fortunately we had those things in place, but to move a lot faster, I would have brought somebody on earlier. Like, I think I made the mistake of and I see a lot of people making this mistake too, because I do free coaching calls, and this comes up all the time, which is people feel like they need to become proficient in a space in order to succeed in it. And I think it's a failure of our current education system where people, like, you're not allowed to collaborate. You take tests and it's only you, and it's very individualistic. But in reality, like, the real world operates much more like the Matrix, where Neo can fucking upload how to fly a helicopter. If you know somebody that you can bring onto your team who knows how to fly a helicopter, now you know how to fly a helicopter.
Yeah.
Like, I can literally dive into a space and become an expert within 24 hours if I can find somebody who's an expert in that space and can convince them to be on my team within 24 hours.
Yeah.
So that is the biggest, the biggest, I guess, failure on my part that fortunately we had backup plans to compensate for. But I would have rather than obsessing over reading books, I would have obsessed over meeting people who were experts in the space and aligned incentives to bring them on earlier.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there, because, I can even think back to when I was in school, and I wasn't a great student. I think I had, like a 3.6 average to get into college, which I went to San Diego State to start with, and today there's no way I would get in. I think you need like a 4.5. But, I kind of knew the classes that I enjoyed and I did well in, and the ones that I didn't. But the way that I really excelled was when they did group projects. They did group projects. I could take the lead. I brought in the talent that everybody had, and we always did well. And that was really kind of the foresight of what it is to build something and bring a team in. And like you say, have a clear vision and all work toward it using our individual skills. And there are things I know I'm not good at, but if somebody else is good at it, that's who handles that part of the job. So, but just again, kind of going back, did you use Airbnb's platform to manage those short-term rentals?
I did.
Okay.
Yeah. So step one was just getting the units online, and we just used Airbnb directly. And then after that, our systems matured into using a channel manager. So we used Guesty right now. And so then we can be on VRBO and some of those other platforms, but the majority comes from Airbnb.
Got it. Okay. All right. So if somebody is, like we talked about, thinking about getting into real estate, and we say, hey, look, the best first step is to buy residential, 1 to 4 family, owner occupied, get kind of the benefit of both worlds, and learn. Taking that next step and becoming a landlord is a scary thing, right? Would you recommend that somebody do that themselves and manage it themselves, or hire a property manager?
It depends on what the numbers look like. But I would say just dive in, put on a helmet, get your hands dirty. Like, I think it's a failure on most people's part to assume that delaying a decision is actually beneficial. Like, right? Like, people weigh the cost of making a bad decision well, but they weigh poorly the cost of indecision. And my wife says this all the time. She says the worst decision is indecision. And I think people thinking about, like, having this trepidation and being slow to get in the game, you blink and a year goes by.
That's right.
And that's a year that you could have spent rolling up your sleeves, getting dirty, making mistakes. Like, I always say, I will fail 10 times and succeed 2 times before the next person who's overthinking it has even tried once.
Yeah.
And so just getting in there and realizing, like, yeah, you're going to make mistakes. Another friend of mine calls it the stupid tax. Anytime you try something new, you pay a stupid tax. And yeah, that stupid tax can be pretty costly, but indecision is oftentimes even more costly. And if you're not taking quick action to dive in and get your hands dirty, then you're actually costing yourself far more than you realize.
Oh, you're spot on. Look, the younger you are, the more mistakes you should make, because you are learning from every single one of those mistakes. And that experience will help you to be exponentially more successful as the years go by. And so you're right, the lack of action leads to somebody who just fails. Take the action, fail through action. You learn so much more, and you can become so much more successful in a much faster time frame. The older you get, the faster the years go by.
Yeah.
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 We all know
and
that.
then to add some clarification around that, if one of my favorite expressions is walk quickly through two-way doors and slowly through one-way doors. So if it's a mistake that can be compensated for or easily reversed, then make that decision quickly and then absorb that mistake quickly. If it is an instance where you cannot risk as much, for example, if you have a family, you're living paycheck to paycheck, and you literally cannot afford to jeopardize your life savings, then it makes a lot more sense to bring somebody on who is an expert. So getting into the boutique hotel space, for example, I would not manage my first hotel by myself, right? So very intentionally with that deal, my partners and I, we were looking for an asset that aligned well with some seasoned investors that we were building rapport with. So we would go hunting for deals. We would bring them back to hotel investors. And the investor that we were able to bring on is Neil Shaw. You should actually have him on. I'll connect you to. He had acquired, I think, like 13 hotels over the last 30 years. Insane expertise. He's an incredible guy. And so we would go hunting for deals and bring them back to him and say, hey, Neil, what do you think about this deal? And he would give us his feedback, and we would take that feedback. And through that process, we were learning about what deals to look for, what deals to avoid. And by the time we found a deal and we brought it to him and he said, oh, this is a good deal, now we were able to bring Neil onto the team and absorb that expertise and that knowledge. So it made lending way easier because, I mean, lending, as you know, it's all about risk management. We had somebody on our team who is highly proficient, had a ton of experience. His track record was insane. He doubled the value of every hotel he's touched within 2 years. And so our lending was fantastic. Raising capital was significantly easier because the risk for investors was a lot lower. And then also acquiring the asset, adding value, and running it. He's been a great support in that asset management, planning out the renovation and design and everything else. So we didn't have to learn those mistakes, right? Because when you're talking about this deal is a $6 million deal, I don't want to risk $6 million of my own capital learning those lessons, right? So A, because I don't have $6 million, B, because I would rather have a smaller piece of a large pie than a giant piece of a small pie. Yeah. Because you find, like, if you have a large enough pie that you can bring rock stars on and still keep a slice, then now you have an insanely well-run asset. It's incredibly low risk. You're still getting a piece and learning along the way while de-risking the situation. So you end up having this amazing upside of opportunity on the deal while having a hedge against the downside because of the expertise you brought on board.
I love it. That's fantastic. How did you meet Neil?
Through Rich's community.
Okay.
Yeah,
so guys getting involved in a community.
Yeah.
That's in the industry that you have an interest in is very smart. That's how you meet like-minded people and can build business relationships. All right. So let's talk about the boutique hotel. What are the three things that you look for the three top things you look for when you're looking for a boutique hotel?
So the top three things are market, value add opportunity, and like what does a team actually look like. So for the market, I look for regional travel markets. So those tend to be travel markets that have great foot traffic and they're within 45 minutes to an hour and a half of a major metro. Because what we find is that during economic downturns, people don't stop traveling, they just change their travel habits. So rather than going to Vail for a ski weekend, they'll travel down to Central California wine country a couple hours away and just stay for a few nights. Yeah. So those markets tend to do really well. And with this deal in Solvang, California, we even looked back at the last 30 years of data. We saw how the market performed in 2008 relative to other markets, and it seemed stable and strong. So we liked that, had good, consistent fundamentals. So the supply and demand were really healthy over the last 30 years. The second thing is the value add opportunity. So we are entering one of the greatest transitions of wealth that are in our lifetime. And so with this incredible opportunity for generational wealth transfer, we are seeing a lot of opportunities where these hotels are run by older people that maybe the hotels aren't brought up to standards technologically or operationally, and that creates a lot of opportunity. So with this hotel, for example, my wife and I, we showed up for the first night of due diligence, and we showed up at about 10 o'clock at night. We walked to the front desk, and there was a sign on the door with a phone number. Yeah. So we called the number. We woke an old gentleman up in the middle of the night, and he was like, oh, yeah, your keys are around the side of the building. So we walk around the side of the building. We find an envelope with our name on it. We open the envelope, and inside is a physical metal key and a hand-drawn map with where our room was.
Oh my gosh.
So like that kind of low-hanging fruit, that's something that you set up an automated system, automated emailing, helping people navigate to their rooms. You swap out the locks so that they're keyless entry. And now you just added $200,000 to the bottom line, right? Which adds, $500,000 to the property value or whatever it is. So opportunities like that where we're literally just modernizing and bringing the hotel to the 21st century, you can add, 20, 30% of the value without even swinging a single hammer.
Yeah, all the things you just described, as well as bringing it online with VRBO and Airbnb and refreshing and taking better pictures. And, obviously some of these properties, probably this one, needed some renovation. And just doing that is real value add. Because as opposed to residential property, where it's valued based on comparables, commercial property, boutique hotels, are valued based on the asset itself, the income it produces, the expenses. The more income you can derive from that property, the lower the costs are, the more valuable the asset. So the value add's a big part of this. But you said something I want to, kind of emphasize. We really are going through the biggest transition of wealth in American history. And that's because we are seeing baby boomers at the age where they are retiring at the tune of about 10,000 people a day. And those baby boomers, they own small businesses, they own boutique hotels, and other assets that have real value, but they've been stuck in these times that are not accelerated based on the technology that we have today. And so it really is a tremendous opportunity. That is one asset class, the boutique hotels, that you can take advantage of because of the retiring boomers.
Yeah, 100%. And that's just one example of the check-in. There are others where, like the majority of old school operators, they'll even have a managerial suite where the operator of the hotel would occupy one of the units in the hotel. And now that we've transitioned to a staff light model, so most people, like when they're checking into a hotel, they don't even want to interact with the front desk person. They just want to walk right in. So now we can convert those units, bring them online, and now we just added 10 to 15% value to the hotel.
Brilliant.
And so little things like that are just all over the place. As long as you can secure a good deal, the opportunities are just incredible.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that I don't even think, these boomers that have owned these hotels for so long even can, think about. You go to Vegas, for example, or any hotel, but just let's use Vegas as an example. Do you want to stop and wait in line to check in? There's no reason to. You check in online. It's all digital. You go up, you use your phone, you unlock the door, you're good to go. And so being able to apply that on a smaller scale, like boutique hotels, makes a lot of sense. And then, like you said, once you get through it, you learn it, you've got the experienced people that are on board, you're partnering with them. What's the next step for you? What do you do after you get in to this hotel? You've now turned it. You've got the value add. You do the work to it. What's the next step?
So for me, I'll say like the half step before that is I look for deals that will cash flow on day one to hedge against that downside and then have big upside. So for this deal specifically, it was, modernizing the tech, doing some very fundamental things to increase the cash flow, all operational improvements before we even swing a single hammer so that we can plan out the renovation. And that's important because you never know what can happen with the renovation. We ran into some permitting issues that ended up pushing back our renovation by about 4 months, but we were still sleeping like babies at night because the property was cash flowing. If it wasn't cash flowing, we would be up a creek without a paddle. So in real estate, you always want to be mindful of hedging that downside risk while maintaining the upside reward. So like I said on my calls, I'll have people that like they will bring me a deal and they'll say, hey, what do you think about this deal? It's their first deal and it's like a 150-year-old hotel that hasn't been running for 50 years. And I'm like, literally, there might be gold there, but the risk is so high until you really know what you're doing. Mm-hmm. You want to make sure you acquire something that cash flows well so that you can hedge against that downside. The other thing hedging against the downside, which is the third pillar for me, is the team. What players do you have in place, and do they make sense for that specific deal? Because not every deal is the same, right? There might be some deals where the value add opportunity is in the detail of the design, like if you're doing a high-end landscape hotel, for example. And so in which case it might make sense if somebody on your team has experience with design and development. Or it might be a deal where the numbers really look good if you add another 10 to 20 units to it. So then it makes sense if you have somebody on your team who knows how to do like larger scale developments, or I guess mid-scale developments in a case like that. Or maybe it's a hotel that's a destination hotel, in which case it's outside of a strong market, but it's a standalone that has a great social media marketing campaign, in which case you might want to bring somebody on board who has great marketing experience, who's done hotels like that before. So for me, it's not always you pick a team and you go into battle with that team with every deal. You might find deals where it makes sense to mix and match different people on the team, or depending on the profile of the deal, maybe the upside is strong enough and you can be confident enough that you can just take on the deal yourself, and then you outsource and you hire those independent people. So it's really like understanding the team and who you can bring on board to drive the deal across the finish line.
So how do you attract the right team, the top talent out there, and then how do you retain them?
My advice for someone selling their home: number 1, do it yourself and save. Number 2, use HomePie.
HomePie makes it easy to buy or sell without an agent. I can list a home in minutes and start receiving offers right away from buyers.
When we discovered that we didn't have to lose $40,000 in agent commission just to upsize to a larger home, it was an obvious choice.
List your home for free at homepie.com. Keep your piece of the pie.
Oh, that is such a good question. That is the million-dollar question, multi-million-dollar question that so few people ask. And the answer for me is building in public and talking to people, having conversations like this where we're telling the world what we're doing. Then that was one of the biggest pivots that I made from like the Fourplex to the hotels is traditionally when people are building teams, they're looking for a needle in the haystack. If you are building in public, and that is posting on social media, starting a podcast, or being on other people's podcasts, now you're creating a flame that moths are drawn towards, and you're attracting that talent. And it's wild because I've been invited to speak at communities and different conferences like that. And when I go up there and I'm meeting other people there, I'm like, dude, I'm less qualified than a lot of the people that I'm actually like talking to in these conferences. But the reason why I'm getting invited and asked is because I'm building in public. And so I am laying all my cards out and saying, this is what I know, this is what I don't know, I'm learning along the way, this is what I've done. And then people spot that and say, I want to be a part of this thing that you're building. Like, I think people make the mistake of thinking that they need to be experts to hop online and to promote, but really they don't. Like, there are two ways to promote yourself. There's the expert, and then there's the learner. And if you promote yourself as the learner, then it doesn't matter where you are in your journey, because you can always teach people who are earlier on in their journey, right? So a lot of the free coaching calls that I do now are literally people who have short-term rentals and want to get into boutique hotels. Mm-hmm. I'm not doing coaching calls for people who have 20 boutique hotels and they want to get into, billion-dollar high-rises. Yeah. Right? So it's like, it doesn't matter where you are in your journey. Just share it with the world. Tell everybody what you're doing. Help out wherever you can. And then that's how you attract the people who want to be a part of this vision that you're sharing.
I love that. The term build in public is powerful. If you don't talk about it, you don't tell people what you're doing or what you're having trouble with, you're not going to get the same results and answers. So basically by doing that, you're attracting people reaching out to you, and you're able to cherry pick those that have the skills that you can work together with. Yeah. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I think that kind of leads us into kind of the power of the mind, right? Mm. And how you have the ability to talk yourself into or out of something without even saying a word. And that is something that people don't talk about frequently enough. We all have those conversations with ourselves, right? Whether it's in the middle of the night, you wake up and then you can't go back to sleep because you're just talking to yourself, or it's during the day you get hit with, something that seems insurmountable and then you just freeze and you don't think about next steps. I've got kind of the uncanny ability to constantly be looking into the future. No matter what the problem is that hits me, my very first thought, and I don't know how I developed this, but my very first thought is, okay, how do I resolve this? And what's the step after that? I never think about, okay, what is this going to mean to me? What do I have to deal with? Whether it's a lawsuit or some, licensing thing or some roadblock, or even personally, if it's death or if it's, hearing something about, somebody you care about and their health and all that sort of thing, immediately my brain goes into solution mode. And it's just something, I don't know, maybe it's inherent in me, but most people do that and the power of the mind shuts them down. And this also goes for, just personal health, exercise. If you don't see results, if you're out of shape and you start exercising right away and you don't see results quickly, your mind tells you you're not benefiting from this and you shut it down. And people breaking through that and changing the way they think so that they could be the best version of themselves is pretty difficult. And I understand you have, a way of kind of dealing with this.
Yeah. So for me, I guess it depends on which way you're talking about. There are a couple of things that I do for this. Number one is I journal regularly. And it's not the type of journal that's like, Dear Diary, this is what happened today. It's journaling in a structured way where I actually clearly articulate and basically try to create a model for what I'm experiencing in that moment. So that's one thing, and I'll get into more details of what that looks like in a second. The second is a model for what I want my model to look like, right? So like we have a frame of mind, a way of thinking where we look around. Are we victims? Are we confident? Are we sad? Are we whatever, right? Like we perceive the world through a lens, and that perception is so powerful that if you can capture that perception and you can adjust it in a way that benefits you, your entire life will change. And so what I will do is I will write out the person that I need to become to acquire the things that I want to acquire. Because the only reason I don't have the things that I want is because I'm not yet the person that can actually attain those things. If I was the person, then I would have those things, right? So removing myself from this idea that life is happenstance and did these things happen to me and what cards was I dealt, none of that actually matters. If you study people throughout history, my friends always chuckle at me because I'm obsessed with Genghis Khan. His background was absolutely insane. His mother was basically kidnapped from the tribe because the males were all executed. The mother was kidnapped and raped, and Genghis Khan was born, ended up going into slavery, had to work his way out of slavery through this crazy escape, and ended up building up this army and then building up the Mongolian Empire. And they conquered more landmass in 40 years than the Romans did in 400 years. So if someone with that story can use it as a catapult into what they created, whether you agree with what Genghis Khan did or not, just the fact that somebody's background does not determine where they end up. It's the perception and disposition and response to the environment that does. So back to the journaling, what I do is every day I will write out I am statements of who I need to become. Because you have your brain, which is like hardware, and then your mind, which is like software. And your mind, you can rewire it. Like everybody listening, if you have a disposition towards something, if you find that you are highly reactive, if you listen to comments that people make where you are, maybe aggressive in some areas or soft in other areas, all of that is rewirable.
That's right.
Who do you want to become and how do you rewire it? So I will write down I am statements. I will write down self-limiting beliefs. And what I find is when I write down the self-limiting belief, I will notice oftentimes that there's no substance or background for it. So I'll give you an example. The other day I wrote down, I am capable of creating a large scale community and having it for a long period of time. And when I wrote that down, I realized there was hesitation in me. And so I asked myself, why is there any hesitation when I saw myself write that down? There's some friction that I had there internally where my current frame of mind did not match the frame of mind that I need to actually build the things that I want to build. And so when I started writing down my self-limiting beliefs, it was that I wouldn't be able to maintain large-scale relationships for a prolonged period of time. And when I asked myself why there was substance to that, I realized there was no substance to it. I can maintain one-on-one relationships with people for prolonged periods of time. I have amazing friends that I've had for many years, and I can have scaled relationships. I do talks at conferences. I hop on podcasts. Why wouldn't I be able to maintain a large-scale relationship for a prolonged period of time? And I realized when I wrote that down, like, there's no reason for that self-limiting belief to exist. And immediately I felt like there was a giant wall that I couldn't climb over. And when I walked up to it and touched it, it just fell over like a sheet of paper. And so that's one thing that I do is I'll regularly journal and just add structure and just try to discover what's in my mind and rewire it and understand what are these rooms in this house that I've lived in my entire life, and are the walls in that house even really there?
Yeah, I really love that. Look, affirmations have been around for a long time, but you've taken that to a different level. And there's something really powerful about putting pen to paper.
Yeah.
And this is physically doing it. This isn't metaphorically like you wrote it down. This is physically, you take a pen and paper and you write it, right? It's not typing in a computer. There's something really powerful about that does get you to think on a different level and kind of step outside yourself, and it exposes those limiting beliefs. I remember when I very first started in business, and this was right out of college. I got into the mortgage business, and my mentor and everything that I had read, there was always something like this, some recommendation, but basically said, I want you to write down, and again, this was physically write down your goals for the next 6 months, 1 year, 5 years, and 10 years. Now, the first two weren't that difficult, the 6 months, the 1 year, and it was different categories. It was business, it was money, income, and it was family and health. But once I broke outside that and I was really thinking about 5 and 10 years, that was a challenge. But I will tell you this, I hit every one of those goals. There wasn't one, and I still have that piece of paper. And it's still, I look back at it every now and then. I'm like, that was really powerful. Just the exercise of doing that makes it reality. So no, I really love what you're doing. You've got the right mindset. You've found a great business to apply those skills to. And I do want to get to the tech side of things. But before I do, I really want you to explain what creative financing is, and seller financing, and subject tos. Can you give us a little bit of knowledge there?
Yeah, absolutely. So creative financing, just to take it the 30,000-foot view, is, first of all, realizing that there are no rules. Like, there are things that people typically do, but generally speaking, if you can come to an agreement with the person across the table, like, there's so much more freedom and liberty in how you structure the deal than most people think. Of course, there are like legal compliances and things like that, but if you are dealing with a seller that is willing to like work with you to make the deal work, I have a friend who set up terms where he told the seller, like, hey, this deal doesn't make sense unless I can get this property profitable over the next 9 months, and I don't want to take on that risk. So what if we do seller financing and I just don't pay you for 9 months? And the seller was like, cool, because the property had been listed for 12 months and nobody took it because the numbers didn't pencil. But my buddy was like, hey, can we just like not do payments? You're already like eating the cost right now because the property is not operational. And my buddy got the property running within 6 months, cash flowed 3 months without having to pay the debt, and then started paying the seller financing note at 9 months and had that 3 months of reserve that they ended up using for other stuff. And it's like, you can literally just get creative with it. When you are doing, especially when you're doing seller financing, it's literally whatever you and the seller come to an agreement on is what you can get, and you can propose whatever you want.
So I think there's this misnomer where people think that sellers are just going to create a listing or put their properties up for sale and say, hey, willing to finance. And that's 9 times out of 10, or let's say 99 times out of 100, not the case. There are the occasional listings that say seller financing available, and then you explore it. But that doesn't mean you can't propose it.
Right.
And so what's interesting about it, and the reason I was smiling so big when you were talking about this, is, I have a tech company that I founded a few years back, and the platform is a marketplace, and that marketplace is there to allow buyers and sellers to exchange, to buy and sell their property directly without the use of an intermediary like a real estate agent. Not only does that save them money, but it gives them opportunities just like you described, which is talk directly with the seller. And a lot of times you can meet in the middle just by having that conversation and that exchange, that when you have somebody as a barrier that may have their own, kind of ideas of the way it should work out, or, kind of pre-decisions on a normal transaction, those don't get the opportunity to have that interaction that could create a deal that wouldn't otherwise be there. So I love that you kind of explained it that way. Can you give us an example of a time where you did maybe subject to or some sort of creative financing on a transaction?
Yeah. So the hotel that we purchased last year, the 24-unit boutique hotel, part of what made it a hairy deal, and I mean, the hairy deals, that's where all of the cash really is, right? Because the deal that nobody else wants are often the deals that have the most opportunity.
Right.
And so what was hairy about this deal was the hotel operator needed to sell their house with it. So the house, basically, it ended up making things complicated because lenders, they don't want to lend on a hotel and a house together. So we had to split up the financing.
Were they on the same parcel?
Adjacent parcels.
Okay, two
adjacent
different
parcels. And that also made it weird because they share a backyard.
Oh, interesting.
So it's just...
Were they cross-collateralized, had the same financing on it? Or
no,
he
they
just
didn't.
said, I need to sell both at the same time?
No, he just said, I need to sell both at the same time. Also, the way the parcels attached and how they shared a backyard, it didn't make sense for them to be sold independently. And we ran our numbers that way as well. It's a very, very strange deal. But with that, on that deal, because we had to finance the house and the hotel separately, we ended up doing virtually every type of financing. So we did traditional financing, we did subject to seller financing, and private money.
Oh, you're going to have to explain this.
Yeah.
So drill down into the details on this. So tell me first, second, third, and fourth. Like what? Tell me how this is structured.
Okay, so I'll talk about the hotel financing, and then I'll talk about the house financing. So the hotel financing, we did 30% seller financing at 5% interest for 3 years, and then it steps up a little bit for 5 years. So we basically had 5 years locked in at a great interest rate, because this was last year when interest rates were like in the 10 range. We did private money lending, which is, it's typically a collection of wealthy individuals that come together. So it's almost treated like a bank, except the interest rates tend to be higher. They have more flexibility because if you go to a Chase Bank, for example, to get a loan, the criteria tends to be very strict just because they're giving out loans at such a large scale that they're very regimented. They don't have a lot of flexibility. So if you discuss deals with private lenders, typically they can be more flexible. And so this deal, we did private money lending at 9.25% interest, which at the time was good. Yep. And then we raised capital from investors, so we brought them in as equity.
Okay.
And so for that deal, or for the total deal, we ended up raising $3 million. $1 million of that went to the renovation. 1.5 went to the down payment, and then about $250K to $500,000 was like a kind of backup reserve that we had some flexibility on. 31 investors.
31. So did you formally put together a syndication?
We did.
So
yeah.
you're the GP and you've got some LPs. Okay, got it.
Yeah.
And by the way, if you want to know more about that, GP and LP, tune back in one of my other sessions. Who was that with again? That was with Bellamy. Bethany. Thank you.
Oh, LaFlamme.
Yeah, Bethany was on. Thank you. I always have to ask Chris, like, who was that again? But Bethany was awesome. So if you want to learn more about syndication and structures, go back to that. See that edition.
Yeah, she's actually our SEC attorney.
There you go.
Yeah. So she helped us structure
amazing.
Everything. Yeah.
All right. So 31 investors. So that really makes a lot of sense. So then you had to do different financing, separate parcel.
Yep.
On this single family. And what was that like?
So the different parcel, that one we did subject to. So there was an existing loan at like 3.25%.
Yeah.
For 30 years fixed. We were like, we got to keep this thing. So we ended up doing subject to, which is effectively where the loan stays. It gets moved into like a title. No, what is it? The title gets moved into a trust. And then that trust, basically, the buyers are able to pay off that note even though it stays in the existing owner's name. So it's fairly straightforward conceptually. In terms of being able to implement, you really should get a transaction coordinator to make sure that everything is like buttoned up nicely, because it's one of those things that you don't want to make any mistakes on. But effectively, at a high level, the subject to, it's this loan subject to a new person. So it stays in the existing owner's name, but then we're paying the note on it.
So let's talk about that for a minute, because people that know about, subject to, or maybe know the term but really don't know what it means to do it, there are some risks to it. The benefits are fantastic, right? You've got somebody with a low interest rate that you can, it doesn't bother them, like the note is out there, but they're still liable on that note. So that's number one. The seller's still liable on that note. That note, that loan is still in their name. These typically don't have assumption clauses, which means they can't just assign that over to the new buyer and have a formal where you're actually assuming that loan and it goes into your name. And there's a potential acceleration clause. Now, I've been in the mortgage business for 31 years, and I have never seen a lender accelerate a note that's being paid on time. Okay. If there was a circumstance where a payment was missed and then they do a chain of title search and they find out, oh my gosh, this was changed. This is no longer in, John Smith's name. This was moved to a trust or moved to the property transfer took place. There very well could be an acceleration that's kicked in and they start a foreclosure process and you got to get out of it. But what's the harm, right? At that point, then you redo the financing. So it's really a win-win for everybody, but there are some risks that people should be aware of. In this case, there's so many loans that are out there that are in the 2s and the 3s and maybe the low 4s that you got to try and take advantage of that. I'm wondering what you put in place for the seller so that they could be assured that the payments would be made on time. Are you a tech investor looking to shape the future of real estate? HomePie is the #1 for sale by owner marketplace, and we are revolutionizing the way homes are bought and sold. I'd love to hear from you. Just email invest@homepie.com and let's chat. Now back to the show.
So they have visibility of all the transactions, making sure that everything is paid on time. And then they also have we have a deposit that is basically like a backup that gets triggered if we don't make the payment.
Nice.
So basically the seller can see if we did not make the payment, but a payment will still go through, so that nothing happens with the loan. The bank still sees it as the payment was made, but the seller can see, oh, we actually missed it.
So
in which case it raises
assurances.
Yeah.
So just little things that people can be aware of. It's not just as simple as, oh, I'm going to pay on your loan. They've got to be aware of there's some moving parts there,
right.
Some hesitation that may be there on the part of the seller. But if you can do something like you said, you put a reserve in place, they have access to see the transactions happening. Maybe they still have access to the online portal where the mortgage is being paid, so they can check it every month, see that it went through, that their credit's not getting messed up by having a late payment, etc. So there's some small nuances to that people don't talk about. Like you never hear that when people talk about subject to, what's really involved. So I appreciate you exposing that.
Yeah. I do want to ask you briefly, though, with you being in the lending space, I have been reading that there are some concerns that people have that now banks are going to start accelerating those loans because the interest rates are so low that they could make more money if the loans end up getting kicked out.
It's possible. The servicing companies really aren't set up to do this as an automated thing today, but we all know with technology and AI and all the other things that are happening that it is possible that could be in the future. I think the part of this that is probably going to cause more delays in the ability for them to do that is that a lot of counties don't really stay up to date, like where it happens immediately when there's a transfer title. Metropolitan cities, things like L.A. or Houston, or those recording offices are going to take documents, record them right away. They become public data. But you go to some place that's out in Podunk, municipality, and they may take 6 months or a year to get that recorded, and it doesn't become public knowledge. And that's why title insurance is still exists and has bring value, because they're going to ensure that you get good title, even though something may not be public record. They're going to go and they're going to go to the recorder's office and make certain that they're ensuring good title. So there definitely is a lot of chatter about that. But like I said, what's the downside really? If you do get caught and there is the trigger of the acceleration clause, so at that point you put the financing in place. Like what's the downside?
Yeah.
You still got to try it.
Yeah.
Right?
And if you do want to be risk averse, then just make sure your numbers work where you're not reliant
if you're forced
on
into
that
that,
low
does
interest.
it still work at 8%? That's right.
If that's something you're concerned about.
Yeah. So before we start wrapping things up here, I want to know about your tech background. What tech company? What did you found? Like, what was it? And tell me what the story was there.
Yeah, so I actually applied the same principles to get into tech as I did to get into commercial real estate. So my background collegiately was in mechanical engineering. So I ended up joining this massive company, massive engineering firm. They had me traveling all over the world. It was a lot of fun. I got to work in research and development, but then I got interested in tech. And so to dive into tech, I found an expert who had done the thing that I was trying to do. I got to know them and built rapport, and then I aligned incentives such that they would want to work with me on it. Didn't do that with the short-term rentals because, like I said, we were just like buying it to move in.
Yeah.
It wasn't until I got serious I was like, oh, I need to build a team and move faster. So what we went into was in Texas, there's a vehicle registration and the vehicle inspection process. And those are two different processes because one is the DPS, the Department of Public Safety, and the other is the DMV, the Department of Motor Vehicles. So it's two different steps, but you need to get them done back to back. And I got my vehicle inspected, and then I didn't get it registered. And so I got a ticket, and I was like, this is so dumb that it's 2 steps. Why is it 2 steps? And when I looked into it, realized, it's because it's 2 different departments. And it wasn't a big enough problem for tech to really zero in on.
Okay.
And so that's an important thing to note because the tech space, the landscape is a little bit different where it tends to be a winner takes all. Because like I said, the economies of scale with tech, everything is so scalable so quickly that the big dogs are really looking for markets that they can swallow up entirely and then leave scraps to smaller people so that they don't get accused of monopolies and stuff like that. Like Google allows Bing to survive because they say like, oh, we're not the only ones in the space, but really they could swallow them up if they wanted to. Yeah. And so our approach was different in that we were leaning on the strategy of fishing is best where fewest go. So when we looked at this, the total addressable market, we projected that we could bring in about $20 to $40 million a year top line revenue. With the economies of scale of tech, the margins can get so fat at that higher scale that we would probably be netting anywhere from 25 to 30 million a year. Tech has great multiples, especially when you corner a market. So that's you can get a 10x multiple, 10 to 25x conservatively with that kind of product, a 10x multiple. So I was like, oh, this is a $300 million company. Like I can retire off of $300 million easy. So I worked with a software developer who was amazing. And we worked really well together. I was in the field talking to business owners because this product was best sold to customers when they were getting their vehicle inspections done because immediately after they need to get their vehicles registered. So we were going to the oil change, like the Quick Car and the Jiffy Lubes. And this is an amazing lesson that I think about all the time. My strategy was build the product and then go to the small mom and pops and iron out the kinks. So get it in these stores, make it a no-lose offer where I basically say, oh, I'll set up my product for free. It was a kiosk that people just entered their information. It was a massive data play because we were capturing all this data on people that were coming in getting their oil changed or people that were getting their vehicle inspected. And in my mind, it was you go to the small mom and pops, you test out the product, and then you take it to these major chains like Quick Car and Jiffy Lube.
Okay.
And on paper, that made sense to me. But the biggest flaw that I saw with that was the mom and pops are mom and pops because they don't think about these like high reward returns and these value add plays. And so when I was talking to the mom and pops, they were super hesitant. They didn't see the value in it. They're like, why do I care about customer data? You know, and that's, and I grew to realize that's why they stay small. So my next step was, okay, I'm just going to go to the bigger chain. So I started knocking on all these doors. I became close with someone who was the treasurer for the Texas Association of Vehicle Inspectors. And so basically it's an association in Texas. They have a ton of funding. They hire lobbyists to make sure that laws are influenced and whatever else. And so I showed up, and this is another important note as well that I use to get into boutique hotels, which is find the single person that can get you where you want to go, and then go to where there's a high concentration of that type of person. So with boutique hotels, it was joining Rich's community where there were a ton of people who had bought hotels. And so I got to build rapport with people and then align incentives. Now we have a hotel. With this group, it was, go to where there's a high concentration of individuals who have a shit ton of these chains. And then I had literally one sale, and now I'm in 30 locations. Mm-hmm. And so built rapport with somebody who was a treasurer of this association, became close. He invited me out to meet everybody in the association. So I was basically the only vendor talking to these people about how I can give them all this data that they're looking for and add to their bottom line. Because for those people, data is really important because they send out like free oil change flyers, and it's really difficult for them to capture data because when you go get your oil changed, you don't want to tell them where you live.
No.
So we were capturing all this data. So part of our aligning incentives was we'll give you customer data if you give us the customer. So they're like, this is sick. And it only made sense to them at scale because they're thinking at scale. Yep. The mom and pops weren't thinking at scale. And so went to them, and we launched into 30 locations overnight, and we literally had to put a stop on this test market because in software, as you know, the first product that you release is literally just validating the idea. You're not building something to scale. You're just getting something out the door quickly so that you can find out how users like it, and then you make those iterative improvements. And then if you prove out the concept, then you scale to something bigger. Yep. We grew so fast, the wheels were falling off the car, and we're like, we literally need to keep it contained. I had owners that were calling me up daily saying, hey, when are we going to get your product in more of our locations? And it was perfect product market fit. But then the challenge that we ran into was in order to properly scale, we needed to integrate with the state system. And we had planned out for this. We built out our product based off of the DPS's, that the Department of Public Safety, who does the vehicle inspections or the vehicle registrations. We built out the roadmap, or our roadmap, to align with their roadmap. Okay. So basically, we saw what their goal was in 5 years, and we said, we're going to deliver on that goal. The failure on my part was assuming that these governing bodies would think logically. Like, I wrote out the business plan and the numbers to say, hey, look, your goals that you're trying to hit in 5 years, I can deliver on it today, and it costs you nothing. All you have to do is allow me to integrate with the system, and we can blow this thing up. And they were like, oh, we're not looking at this yet. We're actually planning to look at it in 5 years. And I was like, this is the craziest thing in my life.
That's the government.
That's the government.
Yeah.
Dude, I was in my early 20s, and my mind was blown. I was like, how is this even possible? Because everything else I reverse engineered, right? Like, I was able to reverse engineer product market fit by seeing what these franchises cared about, and then engineering it to where it's like, oh, I can actually quantify how much money I'm giving you on the bottom line. All you have to do is tell me okay. Yeah. Like, you literally don't even have to. I will go set everything up, and I will just give you. Yeah. And so it's like, oh, it makes sense on paper. Yeah. And they went with it. Boom. Now we're like scaling, found crazy product market fit, and then going to the government. And they're like, oh, it's actually, we're not scheduled to look into it. And I was like, what on fucking earth are you talking about?
So different.
So different. So, and then that's how I got into tech. And now I actually still do some tech consulting on the side.
Okay.
Because I'm wildly interested in it. I love tech. I love the fast pace. I love building great products that people love. And so I'm focused on boutique hotels now, but I will likely merge the two at some point. Real estate, as you know, being in the space, is one of the most underdeveloped technologically of any industry.
Way behind.
And so now it's getting a lot of attention from some bigger tech players.
Well, it is because also the regulatory tailwinds that we have now with
the
lawsuits, with clear cooperation and all those other things going on. So this is where my tech company HomePie really has an advantage. We're 4 years ahead of any competition. But really interesting. So I guess being that you are really into tech, I want to ask you something. I think I might make this a staple that I ask people because I think it's really interesting to see who's using this technology and how they're using it. Do you use ChatGPT, and what do you use it for?
Oh, I use ChatGPT for nearly everything. It's like my second brain.
Give me the
right
top
now.
3 things that you use it for.
Top 3 things that I use it for. So in real estate, I use it for... Well, real estate, I use a lot of Superhuman. It's an email management client. It's awesome. So I use that a lot for like proofing my emails and stuff and streamlining that email management. ChatGPT specifically, though, I was using it a lot to give deals a first pass. So I would upload like the OM and different financials and things like that. It's gotten a lot better at analyzing financials.
Well,
and
now
stuff.
that you have project management in ChatGPT, did you create something and prompt it with all the parameters you're looking for?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're using it for that. You're saying, hey, here are my parameters I look for in a transaction. I'm buying boutique hotels. I want this. I want these, 10 things to even consider it. And then you load in a prospectus or a property address, or how do you then have it analyzed? What is it analyzing for you?
Yeah, so I would create a custom GPT, like you're saying, with my buy box, criteria, everything that I'm looking for, and then I would take all the documentation that a broker sends, and I would just upload it. And I trained the prompt that anytime I upload something, I want you to spit all this stuff out. So I'd literally just like upload it, and it would spit out a summary, and it would cut to the chase. If it didn't meet one of the criteria, then it would just say like doesn't fit. And I like wouldn't even continue on with it.
So that's one way you're using it. Give me a second way.
Yeah, that's one way I was using it. The second way is, and this way I do more for like the tech consulting side of things, is I will again upload all the documentation, and then I will say, like, I will train it on different things. Like, I will train it on being a product manager, which is the person who defines like the strategy and what the product does. And I do a lot of product management. My background is in product management, so the side consulting that I do is in product management, helping teams build out the strategy and the plan, and then translating that into what are called user stories, which is basically a list of things for the developers to work off of. And so I will just spend time training that custom GPT, upload all of the context to the project, and then just have it build out like the plan so that I can spend more time focused on the strategy and how we want to execute and position ourselves in the market, and then let ChatGPT build out the plan to actually get there.
So will it actually write like a full epic, and then the stories, will you have it do design work as well?
Not visual design work, but build out the criteria for the developers and the designers to work off of. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. What's the third way?
The third way, I'd say those are probably the main two ways.
Oh, come on. You put your emails in there, and you have it give you better language for emails, right?
So some of the emails, I use Superhuman more for that. I will say, though, I went through a long period of having conversations with ChatGPT when I was first getting into real estate, actually. So I would pop it in my headphones and do like the voice thing. And it was basically like I would go, my wife and I, we were very nomadic for a long time. We still are actually we're living at the hotel right now. So as we're doing renovations for the next 2 months, then we're going to move back over to Austin. So very nomadic. And so we would go on these long road trips. We went on a 6-month road trip, just visiting friends and family, hopping around all over the place. And I would literally just talk to ChatGPT and say, what about this investment strategy? What about this market? And I paid a lot of attention. Something that I don't think people pay enough attention to is the market cycles in real estate, and knowing what to look for in the market cycle, so that you can see, like, nobody has a crystal ball of when the market's going to go up or down, but there are definitely indicators of how close we might be to it. And so like talking to ChatGPT and listening and saying like, oh, what about this strategy? What about that strategy?
Yeah.
What are some markets that meet this criteria? And then it'll go through. And so like ChatGPT is not perfect, but in terms of rate of learning, I leverage that highly in having the conversations, because podcasts are fantastic because as a good host like you've been, and like I try to be on my podcast, it's asking the questions that will add the most value to the people. And when you can just talk to ChatGPT and ask the questions directly, then there's a ton of upside to that depending on what the topic is. So I spend a lot of time in there for that too.
It's pretty interesting how quickly this type of AI has become ingrained in the business world.
Right.
And still really hasn't been leveraged to get to everybody. It will. And we're going to see an extreme acceleration of artificial intelligence across the board. My guess is 10 years from now, we won't even recognize the way that people do business.
Oh
It's
my
gonna be
gosh.
so streamlined.
Yeah,
So,
I give it like one, maybe even. It's one of my favorite quotes is the future is here. It's just not evenly distributed.
Not yet.
So you're already seeing like people have probably answered the phone and talked to AI bots that they
Not
don't even
realized
know
it, yeah.
are AI bot. Like that's where we live. Even if
It is.
like the businesses that you're familiar with aren't using it, like it is out there.
Yeah.
It is out there 100%. Something that I'm interested in exploring. I haven't done this yet, but I'm going to soon, is in content. I want to create basically create a content production system where it's AI, maybe it's me, maybe it's somebody else, and have AI write the script, create the post, and just release it and just run all these crazy tests and just let the machine run and see what happens. There are people who are doing that.
There already are. Yeah.
Yeah, they are doing that.
They've written models that do that. I have not tried it myself, but I've been marketed to by them.
Yeah.
And it is interesting.
It
to
is.
see, because it'll A/B test, see what works, what doesn't work. It's super interesting. Look, today you were hosted by Brad Rice AI. Next time maybe I'll meet you in person. So,
AI is getting fantastic.
It's getting pretty good. Yeah. Well, awesome, Gideon. If somebody wants to reach you, if they want to present to you or bring you a deal, potential boutique hotel that you could invest in, or anything else for project management or any of that, how can they reach you?
Yeah, so you can find me on socials, Instagram specifically, Gideon Spencer _, so GIDEONSPENCER _. And shoot me a DM, let's chat. You can follow along my journey there as well. I'd say that's the main spot.
Awesome. And honestly, your podcast, I've listened to some of those episodes. It's fantastic. So guys, tune into The Hunt for Incredible as well. And hey, if we brought you value today, you've enjoyed listening and learning, like, subscribe, follow, share, all those things really do help. And we'll continue to bring you blueprints for various things in real estate, business, entrepreneurship, and fitness. Tune in again, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us.